Marcus stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, the streetlights flickering like weak candles in the night. His leather jacket, worn from years of use, hung loosely on his broad shoulders. He was tall with rough features, eyes that had seen too much and a face that had forgotten how to smile. The world around him seemed to move in fast forward, but he felt stuck, as though the past had wrapped its heavy hands around him, holding him in place. In the city, people often looked at Marcus with judgment, whispering behind his back. They called him a savage, a thug, a person who had no future. He had heard it all before. It didn't matter what they said or how they looked at him. He had lived with that label his entire life. From a young age, Marcus learned that the world was unforgiving. He had grown up in a house filled with anger and pain, where his father would yell at his mother and sometimes at him too. His mother had tried to protect him, but it was hard when you're dealing with a man who's filled with so much rage. As a child, Marcus had been terrified of his father's outbursts. But as he got older, he started to learn that the only way to survive was to be strong enough to fight back. His fists had become his shield, his anger his weapon. Whenever someone dared to call him weak or anything less than tough, it was the trigger that set him off. The idea of being vulnerable was a foreign concept to him. Vulnerability meant weakness, and weakness meant getting hurt. Marcus had never known a life without struggle. He wasn't just fighting the people around him, but also fighting the feeling of being trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to escape. Each time he tried to get away from the chaos, something dragged him back, an old habit, a bad decision, or just the pull of his past. He felt like a prisoner of his own life. One evening, as Marcus made his way home, he found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. A group of men he knew from the streets were standing near a rundown alley. They were troublemakers, people who liked to push others around, making deals and taking what they wanted. Marcus had never liked them, but they respected him, or at least they feared him. He wasn't someone to mess with, but tonight things were different. One of the men, a tough guy named Rico, had a problem with Marcus. He didn't know why at first, but it didn't matter. There was no reasoning with someone like Rico. His anger burned hot, and Marcus knew that things were about to get ugly. "Look who's here," Rico sneered, his eyes narrowing as he saw Marcus approach. The so-called king of the streets. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" "Thought you were too good for us?" Marcus didn't answer. He knew what was coming. He had learned a long time ago that when people wanted to fight, the best thing to do was to stay quiet. But that didn't mean he wasn't ready to defend himself. He clenched his fists, preparing for the inevitable. "You know, Marcus," Rico continued, his voice dripping with mockery, "you're nothing but a savage. Always fighting, always angry. Maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson." Before Marcus could respond, the other men closed in around him. It wasn't about the fight anymore. It was about sending a message. They had decided that tonight Marcus would pay for something. He didn't know what, but he knew it didn't matter. They wanted to see him broken. But just as things were about to get violent, a voice broke through the tension, sharp and clear. "Stop," the voice commanded, startling everyone. The men froze, looking toward the woman who had spoken. She was standing at the entrance of the alley, her silhouette outlined by the dim light of the street. She wasn't afraid. "Get away from him," she said, stepping forward confidently. The group of men turned their gaze toward her, sizing her up. She was older than Marcus, but there was something in the way she carried herself that made the men hesitate. She wasn't scared. She wasn't backing down. "What's your problem?" Rico sneered. "This is none of your business." The woman didn't flinch. "I don't care. This man is not your target. You want to fight someone? Fight me, but leave him alone." Marcus, confused, glanced between the woman and the men. Who was she? What was she doing here? "Don't hurt him," she cried, her voice soft yet filled with authority. "I'll buy him." "Don't hurt him." The men laughed, thinking it was a joke. "What are you talking about?" One of them mocked. "You think you can buy him like some kind of animal? He's not for sale." But the woman stood firm. "I'm not talking about money. I'll take him. I'll help him. But you can't keep doing this." The gang members shared uncertain looks. They had never dealt with someone like her before. They were used to fear, used to people cowering in front of them. But here was a woman who seemed different. She wasn't afraid of them, and she wasn't backing down. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" Rico asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. The woman nodded. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I see him, and I see something worth saving." Her words caught Marcus off guard. For a moment, he forgot about the gang. forgot about the violence and focused only on her words. Something worth saving? He had never thought of himself that way. The tension in the air was thick. Marcus felt a strange tug in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, especially not a stranger. It was as if she saw through the walls he had built around himself, saw something he hadn't even allowed himself to see. Rico hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the woman. For a brief moment it seemed like he might act like the violence would continue, but instead with a muttered curse he waved his hand. "Fine," he spat.
"Take him."
"He's yours. But don't think you're doing him any favors." The group scattered, leaving Marcus and the woman standing alone in the alley. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. The woman turned toward him with a gentle smile. "Come with me," she said softly. "I'll help you." And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something inside him stir. It was a tiny spark, but it was there, a flicker of hope. Marcus stood there for a moment, frozen, his mind racing with confusion. The gang had backed off, their laughter fading into the night, but he couldn't quite wrap his head around what had just happened. He had been prepared for a fight, for the violence he had always known. But instead, this woman, someone he didn't even know, had stepped in, bought him time, and saved him. She was standing in front of him now, her eyes warm, but filled with determination. She wasn't the type of person Marcus usually encountered on the streets. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't backing down. The men who usually threatened him would have seen this woman as an easy target, someone who was weak, someone who could be easily scared into submission. But she wasn't like that. There was a strength in her, a quiet confidence that Marcus couldn't ignore. "Are you coming with me?" she asked softly, her voice calm as though the chaos around them had never happened. Marcus hesitated. He didn't know her, didn't know if he could trust her. His whole life had taught him to keep his distance from people, especially strangers. Trust was something that had never worked out for him. The people he had trusted in the past had only let him down, hurt him, or used him for their own gain. But something about this woman made him pause. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in a long while he didn't feel the usual sense of suspicion. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from the events of the night. "I'm Evelyn," she said, her smile gentle. "I'm a social worker. I help people who've been through, well, what you've been through." Marcus frowned, taking a step back. A social worker. The thought of it made him uneasy. Social workers were the kind of people who showed up when things went wrong, when someone had messed up so badly that they needed help. And help, to Marcus, had always meant control, rules, and restrictions. He wasn't interested in any of that. "I don't need any help," Marcus muttered, his voice low. "I can take care of myself." Evelyn didn't look offended. Instead, she nodded, understanding. "I know you think that. But nobody can do everything alone. Sometimes we need someone to help us see a different way, a better way." Her words hung in the air, and Marcus found himself unable to respond. He had never been one to open up, to admit that he was struggling or lost. He had always believed that asking for help was a sign of weakness, something that people like him could never afford to do. Yet, the more he looked at Evelyn, the more he felt something inside of him crack. Just a little bit. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, still suspicious. "I don't want anything from you," Evelyn said, her tone sincere. "I'm just offering you a chance. A chance to make a different choice. To walk away from the life you've been living if you want." Marcus narrowed his eyes. A different life? He couldn't even imagine what that would look like. The life he knew was all he had ever known. There was no easy way out, no magic solution. People like him didn't get second chances, and yet something about Evelyn's words made him think for the first time that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Evelyn took a step closer, her voice gentle but firm. "I want you to come with me. I can get you out of this life, but you have to decide if that's what you want. You have to choose it." The words were simple, but they hit Marcus like a ton of bricks. He had always felt trapped by his past, by the choices he had made, by the labels people had given him. Savage, thug, hopeless. He had worn those labels for years, like an old jacket he couldn't take off. But now, standing in front of this woman, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the smallest flicker, but it was there. Hope. "I can't just walk away," Marcus said, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know what I've done, what I've been through. Evelyn didn't flinch. I don't need to know everything about your past. What matters is what you decide to do now. You don't have to stay stuck. You have a choice. Marcus looked at her, unsure of what to say. The streets had always been his home, and the only way he knew to survive was to fight. There were no other options, no other ways of living. The idea of walking away from all of it seemed impossible, but as he stood there, something inside him whispered that maybe it wasn't impossible after all. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of the city buzzing around them. The streetlights flickered, and the noise of distant cars seemed to fade into the background. It was as though the world had paused, giving Marcus the space to think, to breathe, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the world was closing in on him. I don't know how to start over, Marcus said finally, his voice softer now. I don't know what that even looks like. Evelyn smiled, a warmth in her eyes. It's okay. You don't need to have it all figured out. We'll take it one step at a time. But you can't keep running from it. You have to face it if you want something better. The thought of starting over was terrifying, but as Marcus looked at Evelyn, he realized something. Maybe he didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe all he needed to do was take that first step. Just one step in a different direction. I'm not saying I trust you, Marcus said, his voice still wary, but maybe I'll give it a shot. I'll come with you. Evelyn's eyes softened and she nodded. That's all I'm asking. Just a chance. As they walked together, leaving the dark alley behind, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The path ahead was uncertain and he didn't know what would come next. But for the first time, he felt like he was walking toward something different, a possibility, a chance at something better. The days that followed were strange for Marcus. The moment he stepped out of the alley with Evelyn, he felt like he was stepping into a completely different world. The streets that once felt like home now seemed distant, unfamiliar, and strangely enough, free. He couldn't explain it. The noise of the city, the endless rush of people no longer made him feel small or invisible. For the first time, he felt as though he was part of something bigger, something outside of the rough, dangerous world he had lived in for so long. Evelyn didn't take him to a mansion or to some fancy place. She didn't promise him that everything would be easy or that life would suddenly be perfect. Instead, she brought him to a halfway house, simple, plain, but filled with people who, like him, were trying to rebuild their lives. At first, Marcus didn't know what to make of it. The halfway house wasn't like the streets he was used to. It didn't have the same feel of danger or excitement that he had grown up with. There were no tough guys trying to prove themselves, no loud music blaring from every corner, no one looking for a fight. Instead, it was quiet, peaceful even, and the people there seemed normal, ordinary. They didn't look broken, but rather like they were just trying to figure things out. Inside, Marcus was introduced to a man named Dave, the house manager, who looked about as tough as a teddy bear. Dave was kind but firm, with a voice that made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any nonsense. He explained the rules of the house, basic things like no fighting, no stealing, and respecting the others. To Marcus, it felt like being back in school, like a set of rules he had no interest in following. He didn't like being told what to do. He never had. I don't need rules, Marcus muttered under his breath as he followed Dave to his room. I'm not a kid. Dave didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just nodded as if he had heard it all before. It's not about being a kid, Marcus, he said with a calm smile. It's about making sure everyone here gets a chance. No one's trying to control you. But if you want to build something different for yourself, the first step is following a new kind of structure. Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't used to people offering him anything without expecting something in return, and he definitely wasn't used to hearing that he needed to build something different for himself. He hadn't ever thought about it that way. His life had always been about surviving, not building. But something about Dave's words stuck with him. It wasn't the first time someone had told him that he had potential, but it was the first time it actually made him think that maybe, just maybe, it was true. The first few nights at the halfway house were tough. Marcus didn't sleep well, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had left behind. The streets, the old habits, the friends who were still out there, probably wondering where he had gone. He could hear their voices in his head taunting him, reminding him of who he was. You think you can just walk away? You think you can change? But the next morning when he walked into the kitchen, he was greeted with something that he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The kitchen was simple but comfortable, filled with people talking softly, making breakfast, and helping each other out. It was a far cry from the chaos he was used to, but it felt real, and somehow it felt right. Evelyn had been by the house every day since he arrived. She didn't push him to talk, but she always made sure he knew she was there for him. She checked in, asked him how he was feeling, and offered him support when he needed it. But more than that, she gave him space. She didn't try to force him to open up about his past or his mistakes. Instead, she gave him room to breathe, to think, and to figure things out on his own. One afternoon, as they sat together on a bench outside the house, Evelyn turned to him with a soft smile. "How are you doing, Marcus, really?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel better by now." "I thought it would be easier." She nodded, not surprised by his answer. "It's okay. It's not easy. It's a process. But you're here. You've already made the hardest choice, and that's the first step. No one can do it all in one day." Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he heard her words. They didn't make all of his problems go away, but they did something important. They gave him permission to take things one step at a time. He didn't have to fix everything all at once. He just had to keep moving forward. But even though he was trying, Marcus still found himself struggling with his past. Every so often, the old anger would rise up, a hot surge of frustration that seemed to come from nowhere. He would feel trapped again like a lion in a cage, pacing and growling but unable to break free. One evening, as he was walking around the house trying to clear his head, he found himself in a quiet corner of the yard. He was breathing hard, trying to push the feelings of rage back down, but they were still there, lurking just beneath the surface. He wanted to hit something. He wanted to break something. But as he stood there, fists clenched, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Dave. "Hey, you all right?" Dave asked, his voice calm but concerned. Marcus didn't know how to answer. He didn't want to admit that he was struggling, that all of the anger he had bottled up for so long was still there, just waiting to break free. But Dave's calm presence made him pause. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to steady himself. I don't know how to deal with this," Marcus admitted, his voice rough. "It's like the anger is always there, just waiting to come out." Dave nodded, his face understanding. "I get it. I've been there too. But you don't have to fight it alone. We're all in this together, remember?" For the first time since he had arrived at the halfway house, Marcus felt something shift inside him. It wasn't a big change, but it was enough. Maybe he didn't have to fight alone. Maybe he didn't have to carry all of this anger on his own anymore. Over the next few weeks, Marcus slowly began to open up. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but little by little he allowed himself to trust the people around him. He started to speak to Dave more, sharing pieces of his past, of the things that had hurt him and the anger that had shaped him. And bit by bit he started to feel lighter. Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. "You don't have to do this alone." It was a simple thing to say, but for Marcus it was a lifeline. He didn't have to face his demons in isolation. He could take the next step, knowing that there were people who genuinely cared and who wanted to help him get through this. In this part of the story, Marcus begins to adjust to his new life at the halfway house, where he faces the challenges of letting go of old habits and learning to trust others. He struggles with his anger and the weight of his past, but slowly, with the support of people like Dave and Evelyn, he begins to realize that he doesn't have to face everything alone. As he starts to open up and accept help, Marcus takes the first real steps toward breaking the chains that have held him back for so long. The days had been getting easier for Marcus, or at least that's what he told himself. He had been living at the halfway house for a few weeks now, and though it was far from perfect, he could see the small changes happening inside him. He wasn't waking up with the same knot of anger in his stomach, nor was he spending all his energy trying to keep his guard up. He was starting to feel, maybe for the first time, like he had a real chance at something different. But there were still moments when the past would rear its ugly head and remind him that it wasn't that easy to walk away from the life he had lived. Even in this quiet space, surrounded by people who cared, Marcus could still feel the anger burning inside him. He had spent so many years surviving by fighting, by keeping his emotions locked away, so when he felt that rush of heat in his chest, it was hard not to react, hard not to lash out. One evening, Marcus found himself in the kitchen, staring at the half-eaten sandwich in front of him. It had been a quiet day, no fights, no arguments. But as he sat there, the anger began to creep up, like a slow tide coming in. It wasn't anything specific. just the weight of his past, the things he had never talked about, the parts of himself he had buried for so long. He could feel it building, like pressure inside his chest, a pressure that wanted to explode. Evelyn had told him before that it was okay to feel anger. "It's not about pretending it's not there, Marcus," she had said. "It's about learning how to deal with it when it shows up." But in that moment, Marcus didn't feel like talking about it. He didn't feel like dealing with it. He just wanted it to go away. He pushed his sandwich aside and stood up, hands clenched at his sides. His thoughts began to spiral. Why am I here? Why am I trying? No one's ever really cared about me. It's always been about survival. Nothing more. The walls of the halfway house suddenly felt too small. It wasn't real. This wasn't real. He had been fooled into thinking he could just change. As the anger rose, so did the familiar urge to leave, to escape from the calm that didn't seem to fit. He had never been good at staying still. Staying still meant being forced to face the parts of himself he hated. But what other choice did he have? "Hey, Marcus. You all right?" The voice caught him off guard. He turned to see Dave standing at the kitchen door, his brow furrowed in concern. Dave wasn't the type to push him, but Marcus knew that look. It was the same one Evelyn had when she knew he was struggling but wasn't sure if he was ready to talk about it. "I'm fine," Marcus muttered, turning away. He didn't want anyone to see the storm that was building inside him. Dave took a step forward, his tone gentle. "No, you're not. And that's okay. But you don't have to deal with this alone. You've been doing better, but I can see that something's eating at you." Marcus clenched his fists, trying to hold back the flood of emotions that threatened to spill over. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't know how to talk about it. He didn't even know where to start. "I don't know how to deal with all of this," Marcus said, his voice low. "Everything I've known, everything I've lived through, it's just too much. I thought I could just leave it behind, but it keeps coming back. The anger, the feeling of being trapped. It's like I can't escape it." Dave was silent for a moment, then nodded. "It's not easy, Marcus. You can't just erase all that pain in an instant. But what you're doing right now, just talking about it, that's progress. You're not running from it. You're facing it." Marcus looked down at the floor, his mind swirling. Facing it. He had spent his whole life running from pain, from the things he couldn't change. Now he was supposed to face it? To deal with it? It felt impossible. "I don't know if I can," Marcus admitted. His voice shook a little, and he hated it. He hated that the anger he thought he had under control was still there, waiting to overwhelm him. "You don't have to face it all at once," Dave said. "Take it one day at a time. It's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to let that anger control you. You're stronger than that, Marcus. You've already proven it by being here, by deciding to make a change." Marcus looked up at Dave, his eyes filled with doubt. "But what if it's too late? What if I'm too far gone to fix?" Dave smiled gently. "It's never too late. It's never too late to choose something better for yourself. And you're not alone in this. We're all here to help." For the first time in a while, Marcus felt something stir inside him that wasn't anger or frustration. It was hope, small, fragile, but real. Maybe Dave was right. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could choose to change one step at a time. The next few days were not without their challenges. Marcus still found himself wrestling with his emotions, struggling to quiet the anger that threatened to rise up at the smallest provocation. But he was trying, and that was all he could do. He talked more with Dave, shared his fears, and slowly began to understand that it was okay to not have all the answers. It was okay to still be angry, as long as he didn't let it control him. One evening, as Marcus sat alone on the porch of the halfway house, he found himself reflecting on the path he had taken to get here. His life had been one of chaos, survival, and anger. But now, there was a different kind of quiet settling over him. It wasn't peace, at least not yet, but it was a kind of calm, a space where he could think, breathe, and make choices. Evelyn sat beside him, her presence comforting and steady. She didn't say anything at first, just let the quiet of the night surround them. The stars were out, and for a brief moment Marcus felt a sense of stillness he had never known before. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was enough. "How are you doing?" Evelyn finally asked, her voice soft. "I'm getting there," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It's not easy, but I think I'm starting to understand that it's okay to be a mess. It's okay to not have it all together." Evelyn smiled, her eyes warm. "You're making progress, Marcus, and that's all that matters." Just keep moving forward, even if it's only one step at a time. As he looked at the stars above, Marcus realized something important. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to fix everything all at once. He just had to keep moving, keep trying, and trust that eventually the pieces would fall into place. For the first time, he believed that he could have a future, one that wasn't defined by his past but by the choices he made today. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Marcus began to feel like a different person. The anger that once consumed him now had less power. The weight of his past was still there, but it no longer controlled his every move. He had learned to manage it little by little with the help of the people around him. The halfway house, the place that had once felt strange and uncomfortable, had become a home, a safe space where Marcus could take a breath, gather his thoughts, and move forward. Every morning, he woke up earlier than he used to. It was a small thing, but it meant something. It meant that he was beginning to value the day instead of just letting time slip away in a haze of anger and regret. He had started taking a job at a local mechanic shop, fixing cars for a few hours every day. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the kind of job he had imagined for himself, but it was steady, and for the first time, Marcus didn't mind the work. It gave him something to focus on, something tangible to look forward to. As the days passed, Marcus found that the work was helping him in ways he hadn't expected. The steady rhythm of turning wrenches, fixing engines, and seeing the results of his labor gave him a sense of pride. It wasn't just about fixing the cars, it was about fixing himself, one small step at a time. Every time he solved a problem in the garage, it felt like he was solving another piece of his own puzzle. But even with these small victories, there were days when Marcus still struggled. Days when the old anger crept up, threatening to undo the progress he had made. There were moments when he felt like he was still the same person he had been before, angry, lost, and trapped. But now he knew what to do when those feelings came. He took a deep breath. He walked away from the situation. And most importantly, he didn't let himself slip back into the patterns he had lived with for so long. One afternoon, as Marcus was walking back from the garage to the halfway house, he saw a group of familiar faces standing outside the convenience store. It was a small group of men he had known from the streets. They weren't the same gang he had run with, but they were still the kind of people Marcus had spent years surrounded by. They looked at him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, as though they couldn't understand why he was there, why he wasn't out with them doing the same old things. "Hey, Marcus," one of them called out. "You don't come around anymore. What's going on? You gone soft?" Marcus felt a flash of anger rise up, but he swallowed it down. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He could have reacted like he used to, could have walked over and thrown some kind of snarky comment back at them. But instead he stood tall, looked at the group, and shook his head. "I'm not soft," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm just different. I'm not doing what you're doing anymore. I'm trying to do better." The group fell silent for a moment. They seemed confused, almost disappointed, as though they didn't know how to process his response. For so long they had only seen Marcus as the tough guy, the one who could take care of himself in any situation. They hadn't seen him as someone who could change, who could walk away from the life they all shared. One of the men stepped forward. "You think you can just leave all that behind? It's not that easy, man." Marcus looked at him, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard. Every day is hard. But I'm choosing to do something different. And I'm not going back." There was another pause, and for the first time Marcus could see something in their eyes. Maybe respect, maybe curiosity. They didn't understand, not completely, but they were seeing him in a way they never had before. Marcus wasn't just a savage or a thug anymore. He was a man making his own choices, trying to build something better for himself. The group didn't say much more after that. They didn't try to pull him back into their world, and they didn't mock him. They just nodded and walked away, their silence saying more than words ever could. Marcus stood there for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and pride. It wasn't the approval he had expected. It wasn't the kind of victory he thought he wanted. But it was enough. He had stood his ground, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. That night, as he sat down to dinner at the halfway house, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Evelyn joined him as always and asked how his day had gone. It went well, Marcus said, his voice quieter than usual. I ran into some old friends today. They didn't get it, but I think I'm okay with that. Evelyn smiled, her eyes bright with encouragement. You should be. You're doing the hard work. They don't have to understand. What matters is that you do. Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his chest. It didn't matter what anyone else thought anymore. What mattered was that he was trying, that he was making the choice to move forward. He wasn't perfect and he didn't have all the answers, but he was no longer stuck. He was moving, and that was enough. As the days continued to pass, Marcus found himself adjusting more and more to this new life. He kept working at the mechanic shop, helping out around the house and spending time with the people who had supported him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the halfway house all those months ago. He was learning to face his emotions, to deal with the things that had held him back, and to keep making better choices. And though the road ahead was still long, Marcus was no longer afraid of it. For the first time, he could see a future that wasn't defined by his past but by the choices he made today. A future where he could finally be the person he had always wanted to be. As he sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset, Marcus realized something important. He had been wrong all along. He hadn't needed to be perfect. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All he had needed was a chance to make a different choice, to change and to start again. And with that chance, he had built something real.